many heritage railways exist across the world, operating on circular routes or routes to tourist towns and scenic spots. These railways often use old equipment and travel at a leisurely pace, as their primary purpose is the experience and not to transport passengers. But there was one time where a heritage railway operated an intercity train. In 2008, with the signing of the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act, state governments were now responsible for the operating costs of all Amtrak routes of less than 750 miles within their states. In Indiana, the Hoosier State was connecting Chicago, Illinois with Indianapolis, Indiana, along with the Chicago to New York Cardinal, and together the trains provided one round trip each day between the two cities. As this route was less than 750 miles, the state of Indiana was responsible for picking up the operating costs of the train. And not doing this would leave Chicago and Indianapolis connected by only the thrice-weekly Cardinal, which didn't seem acceptable. In 2013, just before the deadline, state and local governments reluctantly agreed to pay the roughly $3 million loss the train was generating. Operating costs above ticket revenue continued to be high, and these facts weren't exactly appealing to the state or local government, and the state sought alternatives to Amtrak operation of the service. In June 2014, the state started negotiations with private company Corridor Capital for operation of the train starting as soon as October of the same year. This obviously was not possible, and the October deadline was eventually missed, with all negotiations being called off in November 2014. Amtrak kept operating the train on short-term contract extensions, while the state looked for other options. In March of 2015, it was determined that the train would cease operations in April 2015, due to different problems, this time with the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA. The agency was requiring the state to act as a rail carrier, despite it not owning any equipment or tracks, and the cancellation date was eventually pushed to April 30th so negotiations could continue. With an agreement eventually reached with the FRA, the state could get back to their main issue with the train, the money, and return to looking for an alternative operator. Iowa Pacific Holdings was a company that owned many short-line and heritage railroads around the country. The state of Indiana, Iowa Pacific, and Amtrak reached a deal for the continued operation of the train. Iowa Pacific would supply rolling stock and onboard service personnel, with Amtrak responsible for engineers, conductors, and ticketing. During this time, the train could still be booked through Amtrak's own website. Iowa Pacific would take over operation in August of 2015. Once Iowa Pacific took over, the train was the most luxurious and historic on the Amtrak system. The railroad used GP40 FH-2s acquired from New Jersey Transit and 1950s-era passenger cars, including a dining car with its own chef and a dome car. Remember that this train offered better dining than any other Amtrak train of the time on this less than 200-mile route. But this high quality of service wouldn't continue for long, as the financial situation at Iowa Pacific began to deteriorate. The state and Amtrak released Iowa Pacific from the contract early, and in June of 2017, some 18 months after service had started, Amtrak again began to provide their own rolling stock and onboard service personnel, and the state reluctantly agreed to return a larger subsidy. During the time of Iowa Pacific operation, ridership was up 32% from the previous year, indicating that the luxury atmosphere had attracted the riders. But the cost of the subsidy became an issue in state politics again, as the relatively high cost was becoming an issue in the state legislature. The 2019 state budget did not include funding for the train, and without it, Amtrak announced that service would end in June of that year. This is exactly what happened, leaving Chicago and Indianapolis connected by just the thrice-weekly Cardinal. When Iowa Pacific operated the Hoosier State, it was the most successful time in the train's recent history, and passengers still remember the high quality of service today. This shows that people will take a rather inconvenient train if the quality of service makes it worth it. Be sure to subscribe for more.